Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 262, Flourishing in Anti-DEI Times. I was shocked when I realised that it might be necessary to record an episode with this title, but then I decided to refocus and engage some of my legendary sass. The discrimination might be ramping up again, but that doesn't mean I'll be rolling over. So in this episode, I'll be sharing how we can ensure the organisations we work with and for do not lose DEI momentum, even though some will decide not to talk about it anymore. And you know what? The reality is nothing much ever happened by just talking about it. It's action that matters, and I'm here to advocate for covert action if needed. When thinking of the title of this episode, as soon as I mention flourishing, we know that our journey will mean navigating peaks and valleys. That is the nature of life, and we're facing what appears to be a pretty dark and dismal valley right now. Whilst it might feel like we're looking into the abyss, the reality is it's all about perspective. So let's start with a bit of context for our perspective, shall we? Throughout history, those who are atypical in some way have been treated differently. Sometimes they've been lauded and treated as supernatural or superhuman beings, but more often than not, they have been discriminated against, punished, pilloried and cast out. It's my opinion that this discrimination originates in fear, so those of us who are different would do well to recognise that we have more power than we probably realise. You see, on the whole, we don't fear something weaker than us. We fear what we don't understand and that potentially has more authentic power. So it is, in my opinion, with this anti-DEI movement. The good news is that organisations around the world are rejecting the recent diktats to cancel or roll back DEI programmes and are choosing instead to continue with their initiatives. Others are rebadging the work and programmes that they're delivering under this umbrella so as not to attract the ire of the tyrants. Their leaders have talked about it as being reframing, not retreating, and this shift I understand. I do love a bit of covert rebellion, as you know, and the energy behind this type of action is often immense. In both of these cases, organisations are doing what they probably initially intended strategically, which is to approach a position where DEI is embedded into the very fabric of organisation, culture and practice. As a learning and development professional, I can tell you that we resist designing and delivering programmes or initiatives as a sheep dip or tick box exercise. We do our work to bring about real and sustained change so that learning embeds into everyday practice. And as change agents and consultants, we are more than used to facing and dealing with resistance to change, so this example is no different. But some organisations are not working towards this outcome. They're the ones following the diktat like obedient sheep being herded by the sheepdog towards the sheep pens. They are fearful of the consequences of not towing the line, and if I can be frank with you, I believe they are fearful of their positions. Rest assured, they will find employees who have the choice voting with their feet. My concern is for those who, for very real reasons, have little to no choice. They may feel trapped in sheep pens, and heaven help them if they don't look, behave or sound like the other sheep. I think Arthur Chan said it best on a recent LinkedIn post when he said, "The anti-DEI crusade is fundamentally about preserving entrenched power structures by reinforcing systems of oppression. It is framed as a restoration of meritocracy and a fight against, wokeness, ideological indoctrination, and reverse discrimination. But at its core, it's a backlash against the redistribution of power, resources, and opportunities. Those who benefit directly from inequalities know exactly what DEI is and what it's capable of achieving. It has nothing to do with ignorance. I find that to be a very powerful statement. Now, it is true that rolling back DEI programs potentially has massive implications, and I'm here to talk about just one aspect of DEI, and that's preventing businesses from rolling back into the comfort zone of the extroversion bias if they ever left it. Whilst it's rarely, if ever, acknowledged as part of any of the DEI initiatives, with up to 50% of any population identifying as an introvert, it should have been, as this bias affects huge numbers of people. Not sure what I mean? Choosing an outspoken or talkative candidate over someone who takes their time to think about their answers is rejecting diversity and somehow seeing it as wrong or a fault. And then managers wonder why everyone is talking over one another and no one appears to be listening. How about this? Deciding in promotion discussions that you won't even consider the person who stays under your radar with their head down because they clearly lack ambition as they never put themselves forward. This is not honouring equity. And finally, not inviting the quieter person who is recognised as a diligent researcher to the project because they will slow things down. This prevents inclusion. We still have some way to go, as the other 50%, the extroverts, don't necessarily see what they are doing as anything wrong. Such is the way with unconscious bias, and I do prefer to treat it as though it is unintentional rather than malicious. I can't remember where I first saw and read these definitions, but they have stuck with me. And of course they apply to how we introverts are either marginalised or welcomed to the table. Diversity is a fact. We are all diverse and neurodiverse, as no two brains are the same. What is it that people bring to our table? Do we even take the time to explore what gaps they could fill, or are we just looking for them to fit in to what already exists? Equity is a choice, and sadly the bias, both conscious and unconscious, that leaders carry means that many choose not to provide people with what they need to be on a level playing field. Inclusion is an action where we proactively and intentionally bring diversity to the table. And the outcomes of effective DEI is belonging, which is the foundation of psychological safety. So as individuals, we all have the option to continue with our own DEI behaviours because it's the right thing to do. We don't need a programme to tell us this, and if we've had the training, we know what we need to do. Of course, it would be great to have the support of our leadership teams at both global and local levels, but it's not entirely necessary. So what can we do? Here are just some of my thoughts to start the ball rolling. We need to be brave enough to call out and lead by example, so I suggest we name the specific anti-DEI behaviours when we witness them. Saying nothing is tacit agreement and tantamount to collusion. Take the opportunity to share some of the solid data about the benefits of genuine DEIB when it's being weaponised. The performance metrics are there for all to see. And finally, make your principles clear. Mine include valuing difference, fairness for all, and dignity of humanity. And okay, so these words are about my principles, so find your own and stand proudly behind them. Now, what would you add to that starter for 10 list? We do need to advocate for ourselves more powerfully and make sure we have allies we can turn to when the going gets tough, because it probably will. A word of warning though, if you notice your beliefs limit what you think is possible, meaning you keep playing small, flip your beliefs authentically so they empower you with positive optimism. This delicious, non-toxic state of being enables you to focus on the desired outcome, to be flourishing in these anti-DEI times with wholehearted, unwavering conviction. No one will hold your DEIB principles against you in a performance review. Well, no one worth listening to anyway. And if they do, I suggest their stance is presenting you with some really important data on which you'll be able to make more informed choices. When talking about people returning to the office, a pale, male, stale leader recently said that people can vote with their feet, but I don't think they've factored in just how many of the younger generations might take them up on their offer. I think they're in for a rude awakening. One thing leaders need to be prepared for is that younger generations won't put up with a lot of what my generation did. They are more woke, and that's not a negative thing, by the way. It may have been hijacked and weaponised by those who were benefiting from inequity, but its original meaning was, and still is in my mind, someone who is aware of and actively attentive to the important facts and issues, especially of racial and social justice. You can try to convince me that being woke is a bad quality, but you'll have your work cut out. So my advice to all of us, and what I will be doing, is to keep doing what we know is the right thing. For me, that means choosing not to allow my frustration at what's happening to send me into a counterproductive tiz. Instead, I'll be channeling the energy that accompanies my frustration positively. After all, actions that keep me aligned with my mission of creating a more inclusive, collaborative and flourishing world are better use of my precious energy. I'll keep inviting people to my tables across the whole range of diversity, and I encourage you to do the same. DEI may be cancelled in the eyes of the ageing pale male stale brigade, but it's alive and well in our hearts and minds, which also means it's safe in our hands. And I find covert actions are always more fun, so who's ready to join me? If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.